Yeah, no. So this is a question that's kind of pointed towards someone who is ascending in leadership, right? And with additional promotions comes additional responsibilities, and certainly there's going to be this temptation to, with all these new tasks, works extra hours, and then you also have staff that will report to you, and so you have the ability to delegate some of these new responsibilities. Jim, what would you encourage people in this situation where they're in this new leadership role to make sure that they, focus on and do not delegate? What are those key things that they need to hold on as absolute table stakes and not delegate away?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that's it's part of the benefits of moving into leadership in an organization is you begin to have the opportunity to invite people to contribute in a symphony of ways, right? Hey, you're fantastic, what you do here, and you're fantastic in this way, and I've got this idea. If we can come together, how does that seem to you? Because then we'll really be able to affect this metric and go there. Um, I think the temptation, if you're new into leadership, is to look back at what got you there and to say, I got this position because no one does this better than me, right? So I'm gonna delegate these things over here. I'm gonna ask these individuals to contribute in these ways, but this is the thing I'm best at, and so I'm gonna do that. And I think that's a trap. And what happens is if you think about your capacity, um, whether it's in time or thought space or whatever, and you talked earlier about how the fact that we live in all these different dimensions with family and friends and community and vocation and all stuff, education. Um, but it's a trap because what happens is that that's finite, that pie chart of time you have. And now you've taken a wedge out of that pie chart in something that you did as an individual contributor.
Yeah.
And that pie wedge is necessarily something that you don't have the capacity to contribute to in that leadership mindset sense. And the thing that gets most often, in my experience, the thing that gets neglected, right? So again, there's the pie chart. I'm going to carve this wedge out for me as the individual because I'm the best one who can do this, blah, blah, blah. Is that the work that we just spoke about in terms of defining and demonstrating culture is the one that takes the hit. Because I want to contribute as my individual contributor. And you know what? I'm the leader now. So you're expecting me to absolutely go Luca or Jordan and deliver 50 points today in this playoff game. And it's great sports analog to look back at like the career of Michael Jordan and when he was the scoring champion and the best individual contributor on the team didn't win championships. It was only a little bit later in his career as he realized, you know what? If I am able to get everybody involved,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically in times when they're going to be at their best, if I can not only get them involved, but if I can set them up, then we're all going to win. That leadership mindset of establishing culture, behavior, right? Culture is nothing more than a set of behaviors and the rewards that go on around those behaviors. You can say our culture is collaborative, and then somebody has an idea or somebody makes a mistake, and then they get shamed or they get ostracized or they get penalized. Your culture is what you do, it's not what you say. And so you have to constantly be holding yourself accountable to those behaviors that are demonstrating the culture, and that's exhausting. And that takes everything you have. And so you have to delegate those tasks, those individual responsibilities. And yes, even those things that made you a star as an individual contributor, you need to distribute all of those. Give other people the opportunity to rise and shine and enjoy that spotlight. And you need to embrace the fact that my job now as a leader, and one that I cannot delegate. I cannot say, hey, by the way, I'm in charge of this organization. Justin, you go show everybody how to behave. Doesn't work. I can delegate, you go do the books, you go do the marketing. I want you to show up to sales. I want you to make sure the facilities are running well, or stripe the parking lot. Or you can delegate all those things, but you cannot say, I want you, somebody other than me, the leader of the organization, to demonstrate what it's like, what our goal state is for an environment, for a culture. That is 100% on you as the leader. And so as you ascend into leadership, and it doesn't mean the supreme leader, the most important leadership in any organization is the supervisor leadership. That first step up the rung from individual contributor to now being in charge of a team or a work lead or a teller line or whatever. That's the most important. But they take their cues from the managers, from the executives, and ultimately from the CEO. And so your job in walking the walk is the most important thing you can do as a leader in terms of demonstrating the culture that you aspire to have.
Well, I would love to bring, because I love sports analogies, and we're all sports fans here. I'm hoping some of our listeners, our eavesdroppers, are sports fans, so that we can keep this relevant for them. Otherwise, they're in deep trouble, because I'm not going to stop doing analogies. Is I look at everything you just said, not everything, because there's a lot of nuance to it, but I think of Kyle Shanahan. For those of you're a Gator fan, I don't know who are you, Dom? Do you like any football teams? Do you have a team?
I'm not. I'm more of a baseball guy than a football guy, but hard pressed, I'd have to say Miami Dolphins.
Okay, well then you got McDaniel. Well, it had McDaniel, so you had some of the Shanahan tree, so it keeps it relevant.
We'll go back to Don Shula. That's what we'll do.
Yeah, right.
Glory years.
Just glory years, right? But with Shanahan, he is an offensive guru, so he's been basically the offensive coordinator for the Niners, and he even said multiple times, I don't like special teams. I don't care about special teams. And yet special teams has messed up their team multiple times in the past, because he abdicated his leadership responsibility as being the top leader, because he's a creative, he's an inventor. If we were looking at Working Genius, so he's very innovative and he loves creating the game plans, but that takes him away from, like you're talking about, Jim, being able to focus on the core within all the different segments of the business to keep everything running smooth, not just that the offense does really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great example of executives when they go from individual contributor to, from an assistant coach to a head coach, or from a contributor to a marketing manager to a, let's say, chief executive, right? He's still
look at Dan Campbell. Look at Dan Campbell, the Detroit Lions, who lost Ben Johnson, the phenomenal offense coordinator. And then he's like, well, I'll just start calling the plays.
I'll do it myself.
That was a disaster.
Yeah.
And I would say that the organization, I don't know, because I'm not in the locker room or the building, as they say, but I'm willing to bet there was a consequence there with him feeling like, okay, I got to start calling the plays. There's something you cannot do as a result of that. And it's likely what you've given up is that higher level behavioral standard setting and maintaining. And I think, going back to your question, Dom, is that there's no one lever, one button, one factor that's most important. It's a fantastic, rich broth of flavors and things that have to come together and simmer, and we can go to the wine analogy. You have to have this sort of dynamic equilibrium of acids and tannins and sugars and alcohol, and but you have to have that mindset that I'm responsible for this. And I think we do an injustice to a lot of people ascending into leadership roles without really explaining to them, you're going to feel a little bit like you're going out on a wire without a net. I'm going to ask you to do some things that you're not comfortable with. You're going to make some mistakes. When you make those mistakes, your first reaction is to run back to what it is that you did so well, that you were so comfortable in accomplishing as that individual contributor. But what I need to do as your mentor is to say, keep going, push through that, go further, not go back. And I don't think that happens enough. And I think it's because we've sort of been unwilling to allocate the money for those types of training programs, the time and effort around formalizing mentorship roles and programs. Certainly, I remember 35 years ago entering corporate America, and there were training programs. My first job was, wasn't a specific role where I was doing X. I was part of a cohort in a 12-month training program, and it was going to be at the end of that 12 months. Where can we put you? Where have you demonstrated your greatest areas of achievement and or interest? But we've sort of grown impatient for that, and there are a number of reasons why, and it has to do with how quickly businesses moved. It has to do with the number of the challenges we've had over the last, again, my span's 35 years. And so I look at like the .com bubble, and I look at the 2008 recession, and I look about the pandemic, and there are those externalities, and they had this and what the, Treasury did, and the interest rates, and how that distorted capital allocation. I mean, all these things happened that distracted us from investing in our people to help them embrace the roles in leadership. And as a result, we have a lot of organizations that are suffering from leadership vacuums from that supervisor level all the way up to the top, in my opinion.
Well, we value a lot of things we can quantitatively measure, and a lot of these types of leadership skills, employee engagement, developing people, building a strong culture. It's only been the last 10 or 20 years, even this idea of organizational health and some of the elements of leadership development have really started to take root, because it's harder for those quantitative kind of analytical brains to like wrap their mind around the value of it if you can't put it to a bottom line number, I feel like. And we've had many conversations in your backyard around the wrestling match between, the people value and the numbers bottom line value people, and they usually are at odds.
And I think there's a yes, and I think there's a very human bias to try and overly simplify, and that's not always the case, but sometimes I find it's like, let's overly simplify. And I'll give you a great example. We had a problem in the organization around attrition, and it was frontline attrition, and people were leaving, and there was a lot of discussion about, well, let's send them really nicely worded compensation worksheets so they know how lucky they are to work here. Let's give everybody a $25 credit that they can use to buy corporate apparel, right? Let's do these, people are leaving. Let's do something simple, quick, and dirty, and let's try and immediately stop people from leaving.
That $25, that's going to get me to stay. Well, I mean, corporate apparel, $25.
That's right, exactly.
I'm in.
If I can get a pair of socks, I'm going to stay. So what was fascinating is we solved this problem, but you had to dig into it, because there was a point of attrition, and that point of attrition was somewhere between 12 and 18 months. So people weren't leaving in the first 3 months like, I can't do this job, it's too hard. They weren't leaving in the first 9 months saying that I don't think I can ever be good at this job. They got to 12 to 18 months and they're like, you know what, I'm doing this job and I feel really comfortable in this job. What's next? and they didn't have a path, right?
Mhm.
I mean, as you started to dig into it, it's like they didn't feel a path. Well, so again, there was this idea of like, let's just make paths. I'll give you a great example. Let's make, instead of people being supervisors, we'll have supervisor 1, 2, and 3. And so we'll break it up into 3 different versions. And so you go from supervisor 1, and then 6 months later you can go to supervisor 2, and we sort of create this, this fake paradigm of ascension that's supposed to satisfy your need for being on a career path. No, the problem was, and it had many consequences, we were hiring supervisors and managers from outside the organization. That had 2 faults to it. One is people who were working their way up the organization saw, oh, the person who's now my boss or their boss came from outside the organization. So clearly the only way I'm going to succeed is I need to leave. The second problem that was actually more corrosive was that these people we were bringing in mid-management didn't understand the mission, the values, and the culture. They brought those with them from any number of places where they were successful as, what was it? Individual contributors. And so they came and they said, here's what made me successful there, and tried to overlay that on top of what we had. What fixed it was saying there's only one path to moving up, and it's an internal only path. And as a result, people stuck around, especially your best people, because that's who you want to stick around and incentivize and focus on. They stuck around, and as they moved into leadership, they had crystal clarity to the values and the mission and the culture. And when you sat with them and you said, now I need you to walk the walk and demonstrate what our culture is like, they're like, I got it, Jim. I know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
And so that's a great example of,
so spot on.
it wasn't you giving people, high fives or, let's go have a pizza party at every office location, and that'll make everybody feel valued.
Well, our society focuses on symptoms. So it makes sense in businesses, we would also focus on symptoms, like the more surface solutions, not getting to the root cause.